So it's great to see all of you, and first interaction with some of you. Let me figure out where the share screen is and get started here. So all the little things one has to do when you're sitting in a room like this instead of in person. Oops, wrong thing. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit, and I presume people can see this, right? The full screen mode, right? Okay, you're not seeing.
Yeah, we got it.
Yes, we can see.
Okay, great. So I'm going to talk about the HPDF, what it is. See if I can hide this little piece here. There used to be a way to do that. Hide. Oh, crap. Okay, I lost all of your faces. Oh, well. Sorry about that. I think that's the one I wanted to hide. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about this high performance data facility, what we're up to, what it's about. In the background of this picture here, you see Jefferson Laboratory. Jefferson, or Thomas Jefferson National Accelerator Facility is the formal name. We just call it Jefferson Lab. And I'm sitting in this building up at the corner here, which is mainly an office building. If I were to walk through spaces at the lab, these buildings here are all about cryo module development, which is something that the laboratory does a lot of. And then the space here is the accelerator, and it's a 7/8 of a mile around the accelerator, where electrons actually are punched through 5.5 times. And by the time they go through the entire accelerator 5 times, recirculated 5 times, they come up to an energy of about 12 GeV. And at 12 GeV, they slam into targets, or into different types of targets where experiments happen. And on this picture, the experimental halls are actually down on this side, and you can't really see them because they're deep underground. But it's a fascinating facility that's used to discover what's going on inside protons. Some amounts of data. I'm being and now recorded again. Lots of data comes out of the machine, and analysis of that data has been an important part of what JLab does typically for trying to understand the general forces of nature, in particular the strong force QCD, which holds quarks together. And you know, the nature of quarks and gluons is a very complicated and interesting scientific problem. So starting from that point, having copious amounts of data coming out of the machine, one might think about how to diversify the laboratory's general footprint. Most of the time, since its early inception, as most of you know, we have been an office of science, nuclear physics laboratory, without much footprint in other offices. There are 6 offices within the Office of Science, include basic energy sciences, computing, which is called OSCAR, Advanced Scientific Computing Research. Basic energy sciences covers, for example, materials and chemistries. There's BER, biological and environmental sciences, and HEP, and fusion. HEP is high energy physics, and fusion is fusion, FES. And so when we're thinking about our own strengths, a lot of our own strengths deal with data. And so we have been moving in a direction of trying to understand how we can set up a national data facility here at the laboratory, diversify the mission towards something that's hot on the minds of a lot of different people around the country, and also work toward, making sure that this place can get the best bang for the buck when the experiments are running here at JLab. So I wanted to just start with, a simple picture. Computing is really foundational to modern life. When COVID first hit, I'm sure we all had to go home and spend time at home. But the computers themselves at the three of the national labs, Oak Ridge National Lab, Argonne National Lab, and Berkeley Lab, were all transitioned to focus on what would be a way to kill off COVID. And so, a lot of the vaccine stuff that was going on in the background experimentally was being helped by a lot of the computing stuff that was going on those three machines. These are huge machines, near exaflop machines. It's also interesting to realize that NVIDIA is partnering with a whole lot of people. Schrodinger is a company to harness these DGX A100 systems to expand the speed and accuracy of computational drug discovery. So a lot of computing is going on out there. I'm amazed at the iPhone. This is the iPhone, if you can see us. The iPhone has a chip in it, which is called an A14. An A14 can do 11 trillion operations per second. And those are single precision ops, and about 0.7 trillion flops per second. And so it's a very fast piece of equipment, about a trillion flops per second in your hand. So a teraflop machine in your hand, just like that. It's amazing, amazingly powerful. In about 2000, the fastest computer in the world was a teraflop. And so that gives you kind of a scale of the size and changes that have happened over the years in high performance computing. And of course, this is more of a data system and it doesn't have all the computing aspects to it, but that's okay. It's just a scale issue. So scientific computing touches all the S&T domains, from the development of aircraft foil wings to understanding the stability here of what goes on in a tokamak reactor for fusion energy, to understanding what is the CRUD and what is that's an actual acronym. I don't remember what it stands for at this point, but it's basically the cladding that goes on inside of reactor core. This is a regular thermal reactor cores to make it so that the reactor is less efficient. Understanding that computationally actually leads toward what can you do to fix things and make the reactors more efficient. To looking at the structure of the QCD vacuum, understanding how quarks and gluons move around when you calculate things inside there, comparing that to experiment, to understanding the signals that come from LIGO when two black holes or neutron stars merge together, and also to understanding our own climate and what's happening out there. All of these things really are dependent on, at this point, for interpretation and guidance, interpretation of experimental data and guidance of experiments. All of these things are really dependent on computational science. And indeed, the DOE, the Department of Energy, is a world leader in compute-intensive hardware. And we were just on the phone before this conversation with Oak Ridge, Justin Witt, and also Doug Cothey at Oak Ridge and Arjun Shankar at Oak Ridge. They were telling us a little bit about Frontier, a beautiful brand new computer, which is now the first exaflop computer sitting here in the world. And you can see machines from Japan, Finland, the United States, China, US, China, and France, all the top 10 machines in the world sitting on this plot. There's Frontier This plot is performance versus time. And the 1 petaflop machine is, or 1 teraflop machine is right here. That's your iPhone today. That's what I was talking about with the iPhone today. So amazing machines that do these kinds of calculations, and most of them are set up as compute intensive machines. They solve partial differential equations, or they do quantum Monte Carlos. They do a lot of matrix multiplies, large matrix multiplies. They really require fast operations that are usually double precision. And this flop is a floating point. Well, that's what it stands for. Floating point per second in double precision is what that means. And that means you need to have a lot of flops, need to have fast flops. And most of the execution time goes into floating point on these machines. So what's the difference between that and data intensive capability? And so when we think about data intensive computing, what you're thinking about here is facilities that have copious amounts of data coming out of them. So HPDF will integrate data and theory and experiments, both current experiments and maybe legacy experimental information, to enable a new paradigm of scientific discovery. The basic idea here is that if I have, for example, let's just pick one. I think JLab is on here. These are so small I can't really see it. There's the SNS at Oak Ridge. There's Rick at Brookhaven. No, this is Rick at Brookhaven. This is one of the light sources. And I should know where JLab is on this picture, but I don't see it at this point. All of these facilities feed into and have their data coming off, and their data is either processed locally, that's right now what's happening, or it's processed maybe at NERSC, which does have a data intensive capability, but it usually does not leave any further than going to NERSC. And the whole problem is that the data sets that come off of all these machines is enormous in a lot of instances. And so one of the experimental hopes and dreams is maybe I can get my data off the machine, analyze it quickly, tell the experiment that you're not looking in the right phase space for some particular thing you're trying to do an experiment for, and make the machine so that it, or the experiment, so that it actually moves, that actually changes what it's doing. In order to do that, you need a lot of tools, and you also need data facilities that can handle that kind of data and do the processing in near real time to be able to compute and move back and forth across this from facility into compute, analyze data, and move it back to the facility. And so you might have some information at the facilities or some compute power at the facilities, but quite often not enough to actually do the full processing. And that's where high performance data facility comes in. So the data intensive nature here is that we have to devote significant processing time to I/O rather than to flops. So to getting data in and out of the machines and manipulating that data once it's in the computing machine. And there's also this issue of machine learning that one needs as well. One needs to be able to look at the copious data, the big data sets, and understand that data set using machine learning algorithms. And in my mind, as a theoretical physicist, I think of machine learning more as a way to look for extrema in a function. It is actually a minimization routine that you're using there. And so applying that in a manner that can analyze the data, that can actually give you some physics information out of that data, that's what people are after. So Our vision for HPDF actually complements existing HPC capabilities within the department, and that's our aim and goal. So we've set up a vision, strategy, priorities, areas to look at. Our vision is really for computational science and technology here is to further the Office of Science missions of scientific discovery through expanded access to computational resources and application of data science techniques to real-time needs. So there's a deep integration here of theory and experiment when you're going through this. Of course, if you have data and you have theoretical calculations, you can actually start to understand what is the uncertainty in the theoretical calculations when you combine the two. That's another aspect of data science that we're working toward. And our strategy is to design and build this high performance data facility and to grow a data science program at Jefferson Lab. And I think we've really started hitting this second bullet with bringing on of new people to the laboratory that are really involved in data science through a data science department that's been set up with Malachi Schramm. We're establishing partnerships with industries and universities and national labs to build the capability out. Here, I would just mention, we're working we're discussing with Oak Ridge, we're working with SLAC, Brookhaven, and I've lost one, SLAC, Brookhaven, and Berkeley labs to really make sure that we understand how this data movement can happen across the various facilities. And that's an important aspect of HPDF, actually. And we're using nuclear physics experiments as exemplars here at JLab. One of our experiments in the class 12 system that we have here in one of the halls really does make petabytes of data per day or per second, I guess it is. And that's a lot of data to go through and to understand. And so we here, right here at the laboratory, have a test bed to be able to understand what we're up to in the broader sense. We have obtained some Virginia funds for support of the data center design. Now, this is the building of the data center, okay? So we have to build a building in order to put the data center in it. And so that's something where Virginia is working with us. Of course, the Department of Energy will be the one who builds the data facility itself. Our priority areas today are our demonstrator projects, including something called EdgeFat. This is an ESNet driven platform where we're pushing data into ESNet and pulling it back out from ESNet, demonstrating some of the capabilities you need to really push the data science vision that we have. And I might talk about that later on a different slide. We're also doing machine learning and some artificial intelligence efforts for 12 GeV experiments, and also driving the halls and the beam lines here to make sure that we, to stabilize actually CBAF as it's running, to make it a very stable machine. That's a very interesting aspect of what we're doing. And we're demonstrating seamless integration of edge and core computing to support direct experimental data processing, which is very important to the whole concept. So, and we really want to try to engage you all to augment the talent pipeline with university partners. And I think that's important too. You know, data science as a science only has a few PhD granting institutions that go along with it. Most people are getting their PhDs in discipline-specific areas and then applying AI and machine learning to those areas. And so that pipeline needs to really become broader. And it's very interesting if you go back in time to the mid 90s, when computational science was just being stood up. A similar issue was there, that there weren't a whole lot of computational scientists. There were people who did computation within the various disciplines, which was good. but there wasn't a curriculum. There wasn't even a birds of a feather kind of activity going on in computational science. This has really changed over the years. And I think it's an aspect of data science that we'll have to worry about as time goes on as well. So here are the people in the leadership of data science, and Amber Bowenline is our computational science and technology division director, and Graham Hayes is the HPDF project director, and has a wealth of knowledge about data acquisition, and also a wealth of knowledge about how to set up these kinds of systems that we're looking at. Malachi, I mentioned, is a data science lead, and we have some project management help to make sure that we can, we have our right project processes in place. There's Brian Hess is a scientific computing and network operations person, and Amitaj Zing has just joined us recently as a HPC technology specialist, and Christian Palma runs our data center. So this is kind of the team, and I would say that Amber and Graham are really leading the effort for us here at JLab. So what's our progress been in the last few months, last 6 months, say? So the Office of Science is where the funding would go for the computer itself, or would come from for the computer itself. The Advanced Scientific Computing Research effort there is the piece of that. Within the federal budget in FY22, there is $2 million that's going to go toward data science research activities to get us to understand, what are the gaps that we need to fill before we build the facility. FY23, there's continued funding of HPDF mentioned in the budget, in the president's budget. There are connections to the DOE user facilities, and ESNet here at Jefferson Lab has to be upgraded so we can really connect to the facilities better, and that's underway. This says in discussions with LBL, BNL, and SLAC, and I should put Oak Ridge there, but I think mainly with LBL and SLAC at this point, and BNL. Now, BNL is an interesting aspect of this. As you all probably know, that Jefferson Laboratory and Brookhaven National Laboratory are partners in building the EIC, the Electron Ion Collider at Brookhaven. And so lots of discussions have gone on recently about how the computing facility here needs to couple with the EIC and Brookhaven in order to manipulate that data. The Virginia legislature has graciously given us $3 million to design phase 1 of the building. This is the conceptual design over here, a pretty picture outside. And so we are working rapidly on getting that done. And we want to coordinate meetings with VPRs at various schools within Virginia, and then in SURA generally. And so I think that's an aspect of the problem, which is coordination and exciting in some ways. How if we build this center, even though it's a DOE facility, how can we use it to further data science across the region? So timelines, these are very notional. The Department of Energy signed a CD0 back in 2020, and at some point they're going to ask for documentation to get us toward critical decision 1. This is where you actually start the project. And so we're in that phase where we're kind of waiting on DOE to see what happens. And you can see sort of the construction timelines here. Operational computer, these are 6-month blocks. Operational computer might be out FY25 or 6. So that's sort of what we're looking at today. So a big aspect of this is to build the data science constituencies. The Office of Science has the National User Facilities, and I've mentioned a few of those that we're beginning to partner with to understand, the bottlenecks and the things we need to really work on to make this facility to computer chain really solid. We have industrial partners that we are talking to, and NVIDIA and others who have a lot of experience in hardware for data. Of course, Virginia and the SURA universities I've talked about, and workforce development in Virginia is also very important to us. So I think I can actually almost stop there. Jefferson Lab is moving forward with necessary steps to create the HPDF and data science infrastructure. And maybe I can stop there and figure out if I can get you all back on the screen. So that's it. That's the talk. Is anybody here?
Yeah.
Yes, we're here.
So, folks, here's your chance to pepper David with all the questions you can think of, and he can't see us, so that way he won't know who's asking him a question. So you can
try to
be
get
anonymous.
I got you back. So,
Ah.
So David, if you stop sharing, you'll see the grid again, and that'll be easier for you. There
Yeah.
you go.
there we go.
All right. Who wants to throw out the first question? Oh, you're a quiet bunch. All right, I'll start. David,
Okay.
how do you see us working with you? What can we do as the IT committee to help?
Well, I think at some point, and I don't know exactly when, but I think at some point, what I would like to do is have a letter from SURA, which has all your names on it, which says something like, we really want this activity to happen, and so I think this is it's a piece of the puzzle. So that's one thing I'd like. The other thing I'd like, as we get going, because we're not to this point yet, but I can see it coming. The workforce development aspect is important, and each of the universities has a role there. And so I'd like to understand that. The third aspect I think that's important is, what data needs do the universities within SURA have? And so if HPDF can be a resource for various university partners, that would be very interesting. Now I have to tell you, we're thinking of this as a national user facility, okay, a DOE national user facility. What that means is that proposals have to be written to the facility in order to gain access to it. But this is a big but. There's always going to be 10% discretionary time available on the machine that the director can give out if he's asked to, or she, in this case, Amber. So I think there's a possibility there of coupling to the machine if data needs exist in the universities. And it's not just about, it's not just about the experiments collecting data. It's also about big data sets that you may have that you want to keep around for a while. That's another aspect of this we're thinking through as well. So I hope that answers the question.
So I'm going to take the advantage of, since I had you. So as I think about big data and the activities, it's clear there's a connection to the physics experiments and the data and the desire to do active control of your experiments.
Yep.
That one's pretty easy and straightforward. But in our connected world, maybe the data that comes out of the physics would like to be tied to healthcare, to something else, to solar activities, to stellar physics, you name it. I mean, all
Right.
sorts of things. How do you envision all of that interconnecting? So alternate uses and connecting to maybe one of the telescopes and doing those types of things. Have you thought about that?
That's a good question. And I think I could answer it by saying right now, we're trying to understand how to couple different types of facilities together, right? So a light source is different than CBAF. And so you have to start somewhere, and that's a place we're starting. We do have activities going on now with ODU in health resiliency. And there, that's healthcare data. Has to be atomized. It can't be, you can't, you don't want to, you know, there's can't be any PII in there, has to be protected. So there are different, that's a different modality. And so trying to understand that modality helps us in really understanding how we could run the center or the HPDF as a more general thing than just nuclear physics or basic energy sciences experiments. And I think you're right. All of these things like the climate and stuff like that have their, what would you call it, data nuances. They're not all the same. And so that's actually one of the cool challenges, to understand how to get around not all being the same and yet do useful work with it. No.
Anybody else? I'll keep peppering them if nobody else speaks up. So somebody else help me. All right, so I look
You're
at
doing
your,
great, Mark.
oh, there you go. Help me, Clark. There you go.
No, I
Perfect.
was just saying
Thanks, Clark.
you're doing great. Keep doing it.
Oh, all right. So I think of everything from proton beam medical, you know, healthcare that they use for cancer treatments,
Yep.
to some of the stereotactic radiation that happens. And I think of exactly the same thing, that the active control of that, as it's looking at the data and the x-rays and figuring out where to attack a cancer cell, as exactly the same thing you're talking about for the nuclear facility. Seems like tons of uses for this.
Yeah, it's a, you know, it's a fascinating world, the world of medical. So at Oak Ridge, before I came here, I actually headed up the isotope program for a while, and you know, I had the opportunity to go visit a proton radiation therapy center in Knoxville before it was turned on. So I got to walk through and see the accelerator and all that stuff. And you know, they're shooting 200 MeV. It's a cyclotron, IBA cyclotron. They're shooting 200 MeV protons at a body at low, I would say, you know, not intense beams. If it was too intense, you'd burn a hole in the person. It's at high energy, but low intensity. And in order to figure out exactly where you need to go in the body, the reason it's 220 or so MeV is because the Bragg peak inside a human going through water, make the human a piece of water. The Bragg peak actually can only go about a foot. And that's what you need in a person. That's about how big you are in a person. So here comes the thing, and you have to, and you've got imaging all the way around the system, the patient trying to figure out exactly where to hit the beam onto the person. And of course, the person is breathing, so the tumor actually moves around as the person breathes, which has to be taken into account in the calculations. So all of that stuff has to be done on the fly. And so, you know, it's not quite the same as an accelerator facility hitting a proton. It's not as life challenging, so to speak, but it has the same character.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're pointing to. And so, you know, for us, if we can understand how to do it at a light source or at CBAF, maybe that has application over into healthcare. There are activities today with the Department of Energy and with the NIH on imaging, because that's something that we do really, really well in the Department of Energy. And those conversations are happening now. And now you could imagine driving your imaging, just like I said, with the proton radiation therapy type stuff. That would be really awesome. Yeah.
So this is Linda. I'm going to ask the big question here. Since everybody is being quiet, I don't know why, because you guys usually are quite a, you know, vibrant crowd with your questions. So David, I think one of the things I'm thinking about is how do we move forward with you? And the way the IT committee has historically worked is we have an IT steering group which governs what we do. Our committee is one of the larger committees on this out of the SURA board committees. So we have a lot of members. But what we've done in the past when we've tried to approach different issues like the emergency response, research data management, is we've spun up a working group or task force of those folks that are really interested in pursuing working through that opportunity or, producing the best practices or whatever their goal is. So I'm wondering, Mark and David, do you think it would be appropriate to spin up maybe a IT committee working group or task force of the people that are interested in the HPDF that could meet with David and, kind of plug a little bit more into the process and explore? I think what I wrote down is exploring some of the different ways that you can work with the facility, some of the resources or data needs of the members, as well as, let me see, I wrote several things down that seemed like they were member driven questions that David raised. So that was a long way to saying, should we have a working group? But I wanted to put some context and meat to it so that David understood how we work as a committee, because we do have a very large committee.
Carrie,
Mark,
go ahead.
it's yours.
Before, I was gonna say, Carrie, did you want to add on to that before David answers?
Yeah, I wanted to just piggyback on what Linda said. One of those questions I was writing down, Mark, from your first question, the workforce development question or getting this letter together. Those would be two great topics for your first meeting if this goes through.
Yeah, I think this would be a nice thing to do, and it's probably about the right time to do it in terms of where we are in planning and moving forward. So it seems to me like, a subset of people that are really gung-ho on data science within the SURA community would, to help us out a little bit, would be very useful. And so, yeah, I'd welcome that.
Yeah, that's just my desire for action items out of calls, right? Sarah, you just put your face up. I'm going to go with you must have a question or a comment. You're mute. There you go.
Yeah, I was just going to say to David, great plans. I'm at the University of Alabama, Huntsville. I know we're not in the Virginia world close to you, but hey, there are lots of ways to interact. We're very strong in data science and a lot of those type of efforts. But anyway, yeah, I hope that SURA and all of us as individual universities can be very supportive to your efforts. I applaud you for where you're trying to go. Yes,
Right.
Thank you.
Well, let me jump on that, David. One of the things, this is a personal feeling, so I'll put it as a personal comment. The physics world and what we've been doing in IT and lots of other things don't get as connected as we'd like. And here's a really good opportunity to try and find ways to interweave these things and bring in many more of our institutions and many more of the faculty and activities of those institutions rather than just kind of the physics group and the traditional group. And so I'm looking for ways to try and make those connections and see how we can strengthen those bonds and activities and do things, because we've got strong data scientists throughout, we have strong HPC people throughout, we've got lots of other things that I think can contribute. And that helps build.
And I think the department, DOE, would really like us to think through the ecosystem challenges. And so, I can throw out ecosystem stuff a little bit, but I don't have that deep knowledge of the university system. I'm a lab guy, been a lab guy all my life. I don't have that deep knowledge of the university system that would really help us. And so, in other efforts, in quantum information science, we just basically in our center at Oak Ridge, we just basically appointed a person who's at Purdue to run our workforce development efforts. We couldn't we couldn't see actually getting somebody at Oak Ridge to run our efforts because we just aren't that kind of people. And I think a similar thing is here, where how do we do the workforce development? Well, it's about you all and how you all can help with that. And I think that would be very, very useful. And then the tie back to IT, well, yeah, I mean, it's information and it's technology, right? So there's a good tie back to that.
Well, and I like the idea of a committee, because first thing the committee can do is brainstorm all the connections.
Yeah.
And what types of things you might be able to kick off as either subgroups or conversations, or have a little meeting to bring people together and brainstorm and start getting
Right.
that interaction.
That's right.
I think one of the attributes of the university space that may feel a little different is the degree to which we have multidisciplinary research businesses. And I was intrigued by your comment of the relationship you have with ODU on something that's not necessarily just accelerator stuff, right?
Right.
And so I think that's something that while there's a lot of great data science to be done and accelerator stuff, that you're interested in broad partnerships that advance data science generally. I think there'd be a lot of interest from the community in that sense. And so I think that's a real benefit of this sort of working relationship, and taxonomizing the data science in a way that benefits all of the different community members and disciplines.
That was a pretty big word for an IT guy, Clark.
He's trained by Brian, of course, right, Mark?
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good comment, that the multidisciplinary nature of data science is fascinating to me. Personally, in quantum science, it's the same thing. So if you're trying to build a quantum computer, you need quantum engineers, you need engineers, electrical engineers, you need physicists, you need AMO capability, and you need hardware people. And so it's a mix, and you need programmers because there's no language. So for quantum computing,
There's an interesting split in the data science sort of framework of data in data intensive data science, data in motion versus data that might be more at rest, the stream question versus the analysis of large data set question. And I did hear you mentioning something that was in that streaming character earlier, and I'm curious. And the reason I asked is there's different disciplinary matters, there's different technology matters relative to these sort of dichotomy. And so I wanted to get some sense from you. How do you see the HP? Relative to that question and the breakout of use cases relative to that, and that's bearing course in terms of who we all bring to the table to participate and be interested.
So streaming data for the big facilities of high energy physics and nuclear physics, including CBAF, that's important to us. It's also important in the lower energy stuff where you're looking at materials, so the light sources of BES. Because what happens is you look at the material, you can do triggering, you can actually cut off all your data right there at the site, but then you can never get it back. And so for us, streaming data is actually a very important algorithm and avenue that enhances the capabilities of the various facilities. So that's where my head is actually. And I have to say, back when I was a graduate student and long ago and far away, triggering was what it was all about, because you couldn't move the amount of data that you had coming off the machine. So you just threw everything away. Well, I'm sure we threw a bunch of Higgs particles away at that time, So this is where we are in most of our thinking. Now, there has to be a storage aspect because, for example, now I'm going to go into nuclear physics land. The HERA experiments from long ago, there's a lot of data there that they collected. And so comparing our data that we would do off of class 12 here on our machines with that HERA data from 20, 25 years ago is still important. It's still scientifically valuable. And so storing it and making sure that it's there so you can compare data sources, or, you know, compare your data that you've got getting today with legacy resources, that's actually important too from a scientific point of view. So that's the other aspect. And I think we're going to have them both in order to actually make a real play, you know, something that's valuable to communities.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So Mark, we have about 10 minutes left. I just want to make Judd, Cass, any of the others of you besides Clark, and Mark, any questions, comments, feedback on this that you guys would like to provide? And I called Judd and Cass out because they're on the steering group. But that's really open to everybody, including Terry, who's not on my committee, but he loves to hang out with us.
I don't really have anything other than a comment. I think somebody mentioned it before, and maybe you did, David, in your remarks, is maybe a letter of support and us sort of rallying around the work that you're doing in support, and maybe things beyond that will bubble up or bubble up from that, which I think we'd all be happy to support that and support the initiative and in any way we can. And that seems to be some low hanging fruit, possibly.
I think so. Yeah, I think you know, as we move down the path of funding and stuff like that, we can really flesh things out. But in terms of today, you know, that supportive attitude and to say, hey, you know, SURA is all behind this, and we really want to do this as a collection of a number of universities. That's a powerful statement. Yeah.
So sensing the quiet, we do not have to go to 12:30.
Great.
I do want to request that, and maybe Linda, since you've been taking notes, we try and other folks from SURA kind of brainstorm of when can we get a group together to meet with your group, David, to have a deeper discussion about possible overlap, possible things we can do, what experts we might be able to bring to a table. So kind of a brainstorming session about how to get a more interaction in doing that.